When you go to the front lines, it's very difficult for you to sit in your desk and just focus on your accounting job. Humanitarian workers can also be the ones that take away a lot of the rights of the communities. The agencies that are in that pipeline, whether it could be United Nations or even government agencies who normally are part of the process, would be extorting you large sums of money and sex from communities.
I'm your host, Soraya Sinozie, and this is Diaspora and Development, where we give voice to people of the diaspora working in international development. My guest today is Stella Suge. Stella is the Executive Director of FilmAid Kenya, a nonprofit humanitarian organization that specializes in supporting ethical storytelling, advocating, and media training for vulnerable and refugee communities. She spent the last 20 years of her career working strategically to support the growth and the operational maturity of the organization. Now specifically quartered in Kenya, their projects allow vulnerable communities not only to tell their stories, but to train them as media professionals to aid in the overall goals of the organization. On the show, we'll explore Stella's journey, the strategic support she has offered the organization, and how the projects they're running are continuing to support communities across Kenya. Thank you very much for joining me, Stella. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, Soraya. And you have a beautiful name, Soraya.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yours is not the typical past of a leader of a nonprofit, meaning that you first studied accounting and then economics. What led you to the path of working in a nonprofit?
So indeed, I actually thought that I was going to be a tax expert because all through my life in uni, I worked for an audit firm and I was in the tax office. So indeed, I actually thought my life would be very different. But when I finished university, I was employed by an NGO as an accountant. So I was based in Nairobi. Then I got an opportunity to go to then Sudan, today South Sudan. So I really came face to face with the field work, with communities, with really what humanitarian action is all about. When you go to the front lines, it's very difficult for you to sit in your desk and just focus on your accounting job. You really you come face to face with the work, with the communities, with the people, with the problems, and it changes you and it changes your interest. So that's how I came. I sort of shifted my mindset from administration really to what we define as programs. And when I came to FilmAid, then so the first project that was ongoing when I came to FilmAid was the production of film content on what we now call prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. And it really opened my eyes as to the role of humanitarian workers in giving the communities a better and dignified life. I had really a new revelation just from learning that humanitarian workers can also be the ones that take away a lot of the rights of the community. So it affected me really greatly doing this project at FilmAid. And I moved on to programs slowly by slowly, more interest. And FilmAid itself is obviously as extraordinary as you may know.
FilmAid is a unique organization. It's empowerment through film. Can you tell me how the organization works and whom does it work for?
Great. So FilmAid is set up as a non-profit organization, and most of the work that we do is in the refugee operation. And our mission is to ensure that communities have access to information. They have platforms for dialogue about all the issues that affect them. And our training program is with the objective to ensure that communities self represent and talk about the issues themselves. They are part of the media creation, part of media dissemination. And as we are set up today, 90% of the people that deliver FilmAid programs are from those particular communities. So we are very much a communication organization to ensure that that ecosystem, is like a wheel, is moving from therefore gaining skills, producing media, disseminating media, and communities advocating for themselves once they have the skills.
You talked interestingly about your experience first in Sudan, and then when you started with FilmAid, about film and talking about sexual abuse. It's something very interesting. People do not talk a lot about how some humanitarian workers are the perpetrators of some atrocities. How did FilmAid get the opportunity to talk about this for the victims of sexual violence?
So there've been many waves of this problem. It started pretty much in West Africa, where humanitarian peacekeepers and humanitarian workers basically would really extort different things from the communities, including therefore exploitation and in exchange sex for services, for security, for protection, and it hit Kenya. So when I came to the Kenya refugee operation, the UN Secretary General then Kofi Annan had just issued what we famously now call the SG Bulletin, which was then a guideline to the humanitarian community on how to relate with the population that it's serving, to ensure therefore that we had a certain way of protecting and conducting ourselves with those communities. And so FilmAid was the organization that was charged to use storytelling to produce media content, what we call information, education, communication material that could be deployed in the communities to create awareness for both humanitarian workers and for the communities. So FilmAid went to the community to understand how communities in Dadaab refugee camp and Kakuma refugee camp were being perpetrated, and as it were, one of the the key perpetrators were humanitarian workers, and of course the other was very very shocking then to me, perhaps less now, because the others were the community leaders that we put as gatekeepers and the people that make decisions on behalf of the communities. Then there's what we now famously call sets for grades. So for children, school going age, again, they would then be getting exploited by their teachers in order to be accorded some kind of grades. And then finally, is what has continued now to be a major scandal, is how communities can access the durable solution of resettlement. So basically, the agencies that are in that pipeline, again, starting from whether it could be United Nations or even government agencies who normally are part of the process, would be extorting large sums of money and sex from communities in order to put somebody in the list for a settlement, because they don't make the decisions. The countries giving those opportunities, whether it's US, Canada, Germany, are actually the ones that conduct the process, the interview. But then the recommendation comes from the system, right? So it was really there for FilmAid using its storytelling power and influence, so to say, to collect the stories that therefore went into film and other modes of communicating with the communities about the famous code of conduct. I would say FilmAid plays the role of simplifying complicated UN language, which is normally handbooks. Make it simple through storytelling.
That's powerful. And did that did that movie or documentary lead to any changes?
Most importantly, firstly, awareness, and it's still being used globally today. And there was definitely a lot of change within the Kenya operation, because I remember in the beginning when we started awareness creation, there was a lot of resistance, because people would be saying, how can we be living amongst beautiful Ethiopian women and we can't have them? So there was definitely a lot of awareness amongst the staff. On that sort of separation, which is really behind the scenes, is the power that you have by being a humanitarian worker, the access that you can give to all these privileges and services. So there was change, and FilmAid conducted a lot of awareness across the Horn of Africa, from the camps in Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. So I would say largely in terms of creating awareness, yes. And of course, therefore, the code of conduct is about people knowing that they cannot cross this boundary. And if you do, these are the consequences, right? So it did lead to reduction of, therefore, exploitation and reporting, because then people became aware about that they can report if somebody is trying to, therefore, exploit or withhold their rights in exchange for money or sex.
Thank you. Did you have a love of cinema prior to coming to Film Aid? Did this influence your interest in the organization?
So they're not really linked. I did love cinema, but I never thought that I could do what I do at FilmAid. I am actually from a generation, in of course, therefore there wasn't digital media, but during my youth, there was still a lot of the culture of going to the actual theater and watching films, which were largely Hollywood films. But I actually think that between the age of 18 and 24, I may have watched everything that came to screen in Kenya. And even though that didn't really influence my going to film it, I think they were large, it was just coincidental. But it was definitely beautiful having been somebody that loved cinema before. And I love the fact that it was the culture of going to the theater.
Mhm. I'm not sure it's coincidental. It seems when you see every film from
Yeah.
18 to 24, it might have been a
Yeah,
draw.
subtle, but I've just been walking me slowly in that direction. But when I came to FilmAid, I was very much overwhelmed by it. Every time I went to Kakuma, I'd go for what we called evening screening, and at that time there wasn't a lot of alternative media, so we'd really have 5,000 people in one screening. And when I went to our programs in Tanzania, it would be 10,000 people watching film together, which was quite extraordinary. And I actually cried every screening when I went to Film Aid. It took a while for me to stop crying. It was very overwhelming. It was such an incredible experience.
Wow. A lot of locally run non-government organizations are heavily dependent on international funding, and they're top heavy with foreign leadership. You've achieved something quite interesting, turning FilmAid into a fully autonomous Kenyan NGO. Can you tell us how you achieved this and what is FilmAid's structure?
So this has been a process, and it's definitely something very complicated. So FilmAid started off as an international organization with our founder being based in New York. We had an office in New York, and then I would say that just because of the way funding happens, we were much more privileged in Kenya because we had programs in the field, which enabled us to build the relationship with a lot of the funders. And therefore FilmAid Kenya was raising a lot of the funding it used for a very, very long time. We had maybe 10% from our HQ, and the 90% we were raising locally, including the US funding that we had in Kenya. In the end, we were largely responsible for managing, for keeping the relationships. So it became more difficult for HQ to continue without substantial independent funding. And so in the end, they decided to close HQ and have it owned and taken over by another large nonprofit organization. So, because of the requirements for registration as a nonprofit in Kenya, FilmAid Kenya from 2013 already had its own board of directors. So the Kenyan board decided that since we were already fairly financially independent, that they would like to soldier on as an independent NGO, for which we already properly constituted, registered in Kenya, and had a full board of directors, some Kenyan, some from the FilmAid International Board, but we basically had the structure to go on. And this job is really about building trust, being consistent, delivering results. And FilmAid is a very privileged organization because all the I would say all the things we hear now as the desired way of working is the way FilmAid was set up 20 years ago. When we talk about people centered, when we talk about participation, when you talk about accountability to affected population, that's how FilmAid was founded 20 years ago. So FilmAid Kenya has been very privileged because then it already had a very solid foundation. And I was lucky personally, also because I was taught by the person that started programs here in Kenya, Natalia. So she helped me to really see this very, I would say, very humanitarian, human angle. Let me not say humanitarian, human. It's a human perspective,
Mm-hmm.
putting the person at the center, protecting the dignity of the person, protecting the voice of the person, and understanding that the wisdom really of everything that we do is with the person that we are serving. So FilmAid Kenya, therefore, was able to continue on independently. In terms of the funding architecture, it's complicated in the sense that a lot of the countries that fund refugee operations are the big countries. So you're talking about US, you're talking about UK, you're talking about European Commission, etc. And largely those institutions fund international NGOs, which FilmAid Kenya is not.
Mm-hmm.
So we were successful in putting our case and continued getting funding from US government. And for the ones that we don't qualify, FilmAid works very closely with all the, I would say, sector leads who are not, international NGOs. So we get subgranted by large international organizations. So we still access, if you're talking about UK funding through a large NGO, we still access ECO funding through large NGOs. We access UN funding directly, and today, after US government, UN is actually our biggest funder, so we qualify for that directly. So it's just a matter of being again consistent and building those relationships over time. And of course, it's always a mix of other things. Yeah, but it still remains hierarchical.
And local funding is available. And also, have you been affected now with the halt to U.S. funding for many international organizations?
So local funding is difficult to get in Kenya. This is not a culture that exists here. And also, I think there isn't a clear linkage between giving for charity and actually tax relief that individuals may get. So you don't get a lot of local companies or individuals giving funding to NGOs. And if they gave, it would be really a very small percentage. So that's not really well cultivated. We have been affected by Trump. It is a major impact, largely because they have about 50% funder for both humanitarian work as well as development. And so, because we are in that chain, whether it's through the UN, whether it's through the international NGOs,
Mm-hmm.
still trickles down to you, because once UN is getting
Mm-hmm.
less funding, it's going to give you less funding, and the rest of it. So all of us are affected, and directly to the communities. If you imagine that in Kenya 50% of funding was US, it means 50% of services today. You talk about food security, you're talking about education. No matter what you're doing, we are being affected by just the very significant reduction in the services being provided to the communities. So it just means more and more all our donors are talking about shifting programming and shifting priorities. At the end of the day, if people don't have food,
Mm-hmm.
you really cannot teach.
Yeah.
If people don't have food, they really cannot run a kiosk or anything. So
Mm-hmm.
even for me, this is something that I never process properly. That food can have this level of impact that nearly nothing else can happen.
No, no, food. It's been. People have talked about this for a long time. You can't be a good student if you can't eat well. You can't be a good professional if you can't eat well. If you have to always think about your next meal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Nutrition is also another major problem because, for example, all the children under the age of 5, once they are not really, they are eating maybe 30% of what they should be and consuming less diverse nutrients. It just means that in another 12 months, we're going to be facing very, very serious malnutrition. And if you talk about education, the less education, all the young women, the young girls in the communities are going to be facing very serious protection challenges, child marriages, sex gender based violence, pregnancies and all that. So there's going to be very serious ripple effect from what has happened.
And how do you mobilize now? What do you do?
So various approaches, but I think I would say the most radical is basically considering to set up what we are calling a social enterprise. That means a commercial part of our work that can generate revenue for the nonprofit, because of course production of media content is something that can generate revenue, distribution, and our skills development program is something that can be expanded. So I think that's the most radical thinking about social enterprise that generates revenue, but also continuing to discuss with different types of stakeholders that FilmAid didn't engage before, for example, foundations, and also starting to talk to the private sector. My mindset is that even if it's $10,000 as a start, it is a start, and it gets better.
FilmAid works in refugee camps and informal urban settlements. You talked a little bit about your participatory media training program. Can you tell us more about this program and why it's important?
For us to be a communication agency that uses participation, we need to start by ensuring that the community has prerequisite level of communication skills. So we provide that skills in film. We run a radio station, so journalism, and also we have along the way picked other ways that the communities communicate, and therefore also train in that. One of them being theater, then we have music, then we have visual art. So we train across communication as aligned to the way communities consume information. And basically, film is still our strongest, and now journalism is picking up as well because of also the fact that we own the radio station, and there is a greater uptake of radio as well in both refugee camps. So FilmAid provides this training over a period of, it varies between 3 to 9 months, and from there the communities, they have many different pathways after that. The obvious one is that they become partners of FilmAid in doing our multimedia production and dissemination, and we do really mass production, right? Then another pathway is that a lot of them are being now hired by the nearly 50 agencies that are within that context because of their need for external communication. So photography, video, and that ranges from the agencies and also the county government, because we extend our services to the immediate local communities of Kenyan descent. So the students then can do these kinds of productions for money, and they are making good money. We've really had incredible examples. We had Abdul, who finally resettled to Canada, but he had a studio with equipment worth $50,000 in it, and he was producing music, because music is a big hit in Africa, as you may know. He was producing music literally day and night, in addition to photography, filming, editing, and he was taking projects. And that's something you can do virtually. You don't need to be in a space physically. People would send him work, he just does the editing and sends it back. He was a great editor. And then we also see quite a number of our students, when they access durable solutions, they continue pursuing communication and becoming their own independent filmmakers. We already have quite a number in the US, Canada, Germany. We have them continuing on courses around communication. And something that I feel personally very proud of is also quite a number of them that have become global advocates for refugees. Once you have the voice, you have the skill, then, and you have the platform, because they are at the global stage and they are able to really speak to the issues from very tangible experience. So I think those are some of the ways that we've seen our students evolving.
So many success stories. Is there anyone that stands out that you'd like to share?
So my favorite story still remains Amina. She's a Congolese woman who was in the camp, and had been displaced from Congo, and experienced violence, and knew that a lot of women were going through what you call female genital mutilation. So she wanted to use her skill to really then combat female genital mutilation, which of course is very much aligned to the work of FilmAid. But she became a very successful storyteller, film producer, and also really an advocate. She's kind of a seasoned, holistic filmmaker, from creating, from storytelling to distributing and to advocating. So I think Amina is really one of my favorites. We have Niall Deng, who's a global advocate. I mean, it's one of those things that I cannot be fully objective about. It's like
Of
they're
course.
very heartfelt to me, and the fact that a lot of them, I am always on location. Every 1 or 2 months I'm in the field. I know them by name. So um, it's a sweet story. Yeah, but I think Amina remains one of my favorites.
Lovely. You're a recognized voice when it comes to the plight of the refugee. You've been asked to speak at the DevEx conference, UNHCR, and many others. Why is this important to you, and what is it that you would like people to know about refugees?
Thank you. Many things as well. Firstly, as aligned to the mission of FilmAid, is to really speak to the fact that the communities must be allowed to defend and speak for themselves, to advocate for themselves. And you know, since 2011, there's been a very steady decline of funding to a country like Kenya and the rest of Eastern Horn of Africa. And obviously, is really to keep the limelight, to say that there are close to 1 million people in Kenya, and collectively in Eastern Horn of Africa, there is a major, nearly a third of global refugees are here. And they cannot be deprioritized because there's new crisis in the north. It doesn't take away the needs of the people here, the needs of the children, the need for education, the need to prepare for the future. So it's really to keep shining the light here, shining the priority here, and defending, the communities that I hope can continue advocating and having their own agency.
Refugee camps are always meant to be temporary settlements, a transitional place, but that doesn't often happen. Why is that, and what can be done?
That's a complicated question, because largely the countries of origin where refugees come from don't really get the peace that is required for the communities to go back. And now we have a large population of people displaced as a result of climate change. And so, if that status remains, that there is still drought, famine, the community simply can't go back. So I think there's really a problem at a high political level around conflict, and then also really around the fact that there isn't anything near enough being done about climate change to enable communities to go back. So they're just sort of macro level issues that are not being addressed. And I see that as we go along, it almost feels like, what's the new sexy? And people move on to that. And sometimes it's just about talking about it with no action. There was a wave for refugees, and that passed on. Now there's the world of climate change, but there's really no action to enable Somali refugees go back to Somalia.
I'm not just talking about going back. Going back, of course, when there's war and there's
Mhm.
famine is difficult.
Yeah.
But camps are there as a transitional space, either for people to go integrate into the country where the settlement is
Mhm.
or to other countries. But that's not happening. What's that part that's missing? What do you think?
So I think, and Kenya is changing about this, but largely it was about also the local politics. And in Kenya, in fact, for a long time, we were not even allowed to mention the durable solution of integration. We were called to call it inclusion. Like, you dare not imply that people from other countries could stay in Kenya. And the way I describe it is that in countries now in this region of the world, is that refugees are securitarized. You talk about it, we fall under the ministry of security.
Mm-hmm.
the work of refugees. So you put the refugees as part of the insecurity in the country, link it very squarely, for example, with the conflict or the disagreement, diplomatic row between Kenya and Somalia. And it's an easy carrot to dangle when Kenya wants anything, like, oh, we are gonna throw out the refugees, and they've threatened to throw refugees out for a long time. So I think there's just the local politics that is played around refugees to get whatever the local politicians want to get. And it's true, for a long time the durable solution of going to a third country was also a major solution, especially to the US, for which, when we had the first Trump administration, he did close that solution for all the countries that are largely with population that is of a Islamic religion. And now there isn't any, it doesn't matter if you are Muslim or not, so there's no resettlement now. So it's just, and again, the whole issue of resettlement is not also only US. We've seen
Mm-hmm.
literal closing borders in Europe, very serious discrimination against refugees. And there is a way, for example, that the way funding is being given is really to keep refugees where they are and not to move. So it's it's both. I mean, to an extent it makes sense that, of course, a large population stays where it's familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the only objective. Is that people shouldn't really not be moving from Africa to the global north.
Exactly.
So it's a complex macro level politics and things like that.
Indeed. Film Aid has an annual film festival. It's in its 17th or going into its 18th year. What contributes to this festival's success?
I think largely it's the passion. I mean, the staff who drive the film festival, um, they've seen the success, and I think because they are creators, they often say to me that because we produce film, our primary reason is that somebody can see our film. So it's largely a platform for them to distribute content, as is for other festivals. And then for FilmAid as an organization is also because it's a platform for refugees to advocate and speak to a wider audience about who they are, and people interact with their persons and understand that also, when you talk about refugees, you're talking about a 20-year-old woman born in Dadaab refugee camp. So it's really to unpack and create greater awareness to the local community in Kenya about the population of refugees. I think we've been successful because we've had long-term great partners, including also the US government that has funded our film festival, I suppose, for up to 15 years straight. And now we have new partners from the United Nations. We have other partners as well from government. So there's a government agency for film, Kenya Film Commission. So I think it's also a partnership. And in this business, really you start to get a following, and people that love the kind of work that you are producing. So there is a growing community that love the work of FilmAid. And I think it's also about, if you do something consistently, you grow an audience.
What's next for Film Aid and what's next for Stella?
That's a tough question for FilmAid, because I think all of us are disrupted as a result of the US government orders. It's brought new order or new disorder. So we are all reorganizing. But I am excited about this direction of creating a social enterprise, because you innovate as well during difficult times. I think that's going to be something amazing, because it's a different perspective, generating on revenue and doing things differently, because the private sector works with a different mindset from the NGOs. So that's something that's it's gonna be interesting for FilmAid. And my long term dream for FilmAid would have been really the extraordinary work that it does in Kenya can move to other parts of at least if not the world, is parts of Eastern Horn of Africa, where a lot of these refugees are being hosted. Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania are major refugee hosts. So hopefully, we keep this dream and keep pursuing it. For me personally, I will be. I just completed 20 years at FilmAid, so it's a tough time. It feels like a crossroad. I mean, I do love FilmAid quite a lot. Therefore, from the many different dimensions of the mission, and frankly, I think I've come to love refugees. Like my heart is there, but I do hope to grow out of this, maybe to have a different perspective about refugee work, and have different collaborations and partnerships beyond film aid.
From your perspective, what is the most powerful way a film or media piece has shifted attitudes or sparked community action?
um, so film is something quite powerful as a media, and I think it's because it's something visual. So every time people see things that they identify, situation that you identify with, a story that you identify with, people identify much more if they see it visually than if it's just a narrative that you're hearing. And that's my perspective. So I think there is really something called the power of film and visual work. So that's what I see as something that has led to a lot of the impact, and it's a powerful storytelling tool as well. Also because of acting and dramatizing, which is also a powerful perspective for Africa. The component of drama, and people identify greatly with that. So I think it really is, as it were, a powerful tool of communication.
After you spoke about it, 20 years in this space, what keeps you motivated? And what advice would you give to others pursuing humanitarian innovation?
I think I've been very lucky as a person. Firstly, because when I came to FilmAid, I fell in love with its mission, and I was just mind blown by the power of film, the way we presented our cinema in the communities, the attraction that it had. Literally, people would be running after film aid. And the way communities talk about film aid is that the impact is there. When you ask people, what is your trusted source of information, they don't tell you radio or TV, they tell you film aid. That's extremely powerful to be a part of, to be a great trusted local voice, right? So I think I've been very lucky from a mission point that I was part of an incredible, absolutely unique mission. And I think I was always very motivated as the key salesperson of this unique mission. And I've seen the change of it, from when nobody understood. Like, you made your full-time job is giving information. Like, yes, now everybody talks about these principles entrenched in some big UN books, and like finally it's coming home. So I've been privileged to be the person that speaks for the importance and the role of communication in humanitarian and development. And just from the sort of a professional point, you know, I started off as an accountant, and it's still a very important management perspective. So I was kind of upscaling and doing other components of the work. It brought it all together because still every enterprise boils down to books and accountability, professionalism, integrity. So a lot of my background was already very useful for the work that I became responsible for. And filming, there's no dull moment. I am responsible across 5 departments. That's exciting. I get to go on location during film production. I go to screening with women. I am going down this week to one of the counties in Kenya talking about protection of women. And for being female, those things are very important to me because I came from a rural setting and I know the issues. So I have been very, very privileged, really, across the board.
Any advice you'd give to people who want to go into this field? Not exactly, cellmate is very niche, but who want to go into the humanitarian
Into
field.
humanitarian work. Um, I mean, I think firstly is just, I say it's not for the faint-hearted, because there is really a big part of it that you experience human suffering, and it's not for everybody. But if that is something that you have the desire to make a difference, then humanitarian work is also great because you really see yourself making change day after day. You see you change, and I say a life at a time. It doesn't have to be a million people. You change this life today and tomorrow, and consistently this way.
How do you recharge and how do you stay empathetic?
I have many privileges. I have 4 children, and I should film it someday because when I get home and from them taking away my handbag, oh mom, how was your day? And I am asking them. So it's like a very exciting, privileged life to have my children. That's something very exciting, and I love interacting with people who are my peers. So I go and have conversations with people. I believe in counseling, so I make sure that I offload the challenges that humanitarian work presents and all these kinds of things. So I have many different dimensions, and I always talk about there's a priest. He's now passed on, called Father Luigi Giussani, whose perspective I trust, and he always gives me a very human perspective, and I follow and read his work until now. He wrote many things. So Father Giussani is also a hand or a face that I look at.
So therapy is important. I think people should. I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Yes.
And religion is always key to centering people. Any favorite films from past Film Aid alumni and why?
Um, hmm. There are many filmmaid films. There are two that I still love from nearly 5 years ago from Dadaab. So one of them is called Mama, which is actually a poem. So one of our students is he's both a film producer but also a poet. So he tells this story of Africa, and he kind of presents the backstory of Somalia, Ethiopia, and South Sudan together, and saying "Mama, why?" And I love it because it's told just in a very powerful way, and it also, I mean, it brings out the strength of poetry, and when it comes together with film, it's something incredible. And I love, there's a story called The Other Dadaab. I love it as well because it also shows the normalcy of the person, the refugee. It's not just the crisis. It's also that it's normal that people have children, people go to school, people love sports, people do the things that you and I do. So I love that story as well because it presents a different perspective. And there's another film that I love as well called Dear Mr. Peace, which is young people using music. And I think I just love when two components come together as well, like seeing music and film together is always something beautiful because it just brings the power of both sides of arts, and it's always incredibly powerful.
Thank you for sharing that. Any surprising or insights you've received from screenings?
It's also one of those things that you feel like you should have been having behind the scenes for all of that. um I think firstly, FilmAid's own experience, just the sheer numbers of people just wide-eyed watching film, it's been just absolutely extraordinary. We've screened films in places where people had never seen film before, and it was just literally moving me to tears. And I think all the time, when people see stories that they identify, one of them was when film is screened, it's called The Yellow Card, which is a story of HIV and AIDS, and people just seeing, normally people identify with those stories, and just the shock of it, and the reaction, and people recognizing the change that they need to make within themselves.
So, what's your hope for the future, Stella?
It's a very difficult time, for Kenya, where I work and live. I am hopeful that the role that the government is starting to play, which is firstly, they already signed into law the Refugee Act, which gives a bit more rights to refugees, whether you're talking about freedom of movement, work, business, and um, just some of these they're not even small freedoms. When you talk about really freedom of movement, it's not something small, because right now people are concentrated within the refugee camp. So I think that's something that shows me that even though it looks terrible, it will get better someday. And in Kenya, we have consistently educated the communities, and education in time gives fruit. because people start to just identify different pathways, they start to go in different directions, they start to protect themselves, they become self-reliant, and they become part of the world, which is something always beautiful. So I think that small strides that we are making, and I think, we are being consistent in Kenya every single day, taking a step forward, even though the challenges may be as humongous as they sound. There is continuous day by day steps forward.
Thank you. On that note, we'll end it. Thanks a lot, Stella.
Thank you, Soraya.
Join us every first Tuesday of the month. Don't forget to like us, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and find us on Instagram and on our website if you'd like to be featured as a guest or have any recommendations for guests. We look forward to hearing from you.